Ja, välkomna till Folkets Radio. Welcome to the People's Radio of Sweden. Today with a very special guest with us from United States, John Kiriakou, author, former CIA officer and famous whistleblower. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Thank you. So what I really want to discuss with you is the topic of your latest article, how government use sort of the pretext of fighting disinformation and conspiracy theory to actually attack freedom of speech. And that is something with a great concern for us here in Sweden as well lately. But before we dive into that, perhaps you could say a few words about your background. You blew the whistle about 15 years ago on the CIA torture program. A little bit about your background and what you're doing today.
Yeah, 15 years ago. It actually was 15 years ago. Sure. My name is John Kiriakou. I spent 15 years in the CIA. The first half of my career was in analysis. The second half was in counterterrorism operations. And I was the chief of counterterrorism operations for the CIA in Pakistan after the 9/11 attacks. In that capacity, I led a series of raids in March of 2002 that resulted in the capture of Abu Zubaydah, who we believed at the time was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. He was not. He was certainly a bad guy, but he was not the terrorist Superman that the CIA thought he was. And I returned to CIA headquarters and was asked if I wanted to be trained in the use of what they called enhanced interrogation techniques, torture techniques. I declined. I'm sorry to say I was the only person who declined. And, I believed it was illegal. I believed it was immoral and unethical. And I thought, certainly somebody is going to come out and say something. And nobody did. And so finally I did. I went to the media here in the United States and I said that the CIA was torturing its prisoners and that torture had been approved at the highest levels of government, meaning the President of the United States. As you might imagine, the weight of the U.S. government fell on my head, and I spent 2 years in a federal prison from 2013 to 2015, and I've been kind of an activist and an author and journalist ever since.
One term that became widely known in this context was waterboarding.
Yes.
What is that?
Yes, waterboarding was supposed to be the most severe technique that the CIA used. What they do is they take a prisoner and strap him to a board so that he can't move. They immobilize his head so he can't turn his head. They but they raise the feet compared to the head, so the head is lower. They put material like cloth over your mouth, and then they pour water on your face. Water actually does get down your throat, and it gives you the feeling that you're drowning. You seize up, your muscles seize up, water's going down your throat. It's actually going into your lungs as you're gasping for air. And in several cases, we actually did damage to people where Abu Zubaydah, for example, his heart stopped beating, he drowned, and he had to be revived. As sick as it sounds, he was revived so he could be tortured further. But it's a traumatic form of torture that leaves lasting mental and emotional effects.
So that's abolished now, or?
Well, that's what they tell us. But I've said consistently for many years, the CIA told us that there was no torture program. That was a lie.
Yeah.
They told us that there was no system of secret prisons around the world. That was a lie. They told us that there were no international kidnappings and renditions. That was a lie. They told us that they weren't spying on Americans. That was a lie. Well, now they're telling us that there's no torture program anymore and there's no waterboarding. And they actually made a mistake recently in two separate comments, the CIA's Office of Public Affairs said, oh, we haven't done that since 2005. And then later they said, oh, we haven't done that since 2009. Well, which one is it? Is it 2005 or is it 2009, or are you still doing it and you're just lying about it like you've lied about everything else? Yeah. So we don't know. So
in your recent article in, I think, Consortium News, so you wrote it, right? You warn about this new, it's called Disinformation Governance Board that the Biden administration has created. I think it belongs to the Homeland Security. So what is that exactly, Disinformation Governance Board?
Well, what it was meant to be, according to the Biden administration, was a governmental body housed, of all places, in the Department of Homeland Security that was supposed to be on the lookout for disinformation and propaganda. And it was supposed to shut down this disinformation and propaganda. But it never even attempted to define what those words meant. And the woman who was named to chair the board, Nina Jankowicz, she's an academic who's written several books about disinformation, but she was also involved with creating disinformation in support of Ukraine. So is she supposed to be the lookout for disinformation, or is she creating disinformation? You can't do both, right? This is intellectually unfair. Yeah. And, she went up to the Senate for her confirmation hearings, and the Disinformation Board didn't have a charter. It didn't have a mission statement. She couldn't answer the most basic questions about what exactly it was that she was supposed to do. She couldn't answer questions about staffing or about who this disinformation board would report to. And then there turned out to be a couple of actually reasonable senators. We're very polarized in the United States right now politically, mostly thanks to Donald Trump. And so there are some senators who are considered to be jokes, and there are other senators who are serious people. We call them show horses and workhorses. Okay. A couple of the workhorses, like Senator Mitt Romney, for example, and Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana, they said, look, we urge you, they told Biden in a letter, we urge you not to do this. This has not been fully thought out. And it could be a disaster. First of all, it's probably unconstitutional because the U.S. government, by law, is forbidden from interfering in Americans' access to information. It's in the First Amendment of the Constitution. Exactly, yeah. And so what the White House ended up doing was suspending it or freezing it. It's probably just going to die a quiet death. That was one bullet that was dodged, I think. And I say in this article, an equally dangerous proposition is the fact that now we have private companies deciding what's propaganda and what's not.
But we have a similar institution actually also being launched in Sweden. We haven't really seen exactly what it's going to do yet. It has an enormous budget. But one thing which is very Orwellian, which you point out, I think, in your article, is something very slippery with this word, disinformation, because you don't know exactly what it means, right? I mean, it's not like lie or truth. What exactly is it?
Right. We had a recent incident here where the New York Post, which is it's a tabloid newspaper in New York City, it broke the story about the Hunter Biden laptop computer. Right? So Hunter Biden, the president's son, well-known drug addict. He frequents prostitutes. He's constantly getting himself in trouble. He took his broken laptop to a repair place and left it there. And he apparently just forgot about it. Well, when they were repairing the laptop, they found hundreds of photos of him smoking crack and smoking heroin and cavorting with prostitutes and doing all these kinds of things. So the New York Post reported on this, and Twitter refused to allow people to link to the article. They said it was disinformation. A group of 51 retired senior level CIA officers, including 3 former directors of the CIA, said this is a Russian disinformation plot, that this is not Hunter Biden's laptop. This was planted by the Russians to discredit the president. Well, as it turned out, Hunter Biden came out and said, yeah, it's my laptop. I'm a crackhead. It was me in the pictures. Sorry. I have an addiction. It's an illness, right? But then what's the remedy from Twitter? This was a legitimate news story. Yeah. And Twitter just decided, the American people aren't going to see this. And if they want to see this, we're going to block them from seeing it. And then the CIA said, oh, no, Twitter's right. This is disinformation. The American people shouldn't see this. Well, it's only going to get worse with these crazy oversight boards. It doesn't make any sense in a free society.
No. I saw recently there was, I think Senator Ron Paul confronted the secretary of this new institution, or the Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, I think his name, right?
That's right.
And Ron Paul said that the United States government is the largest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world. And he mentioned stuff like Iran-Contra and the Pentagon papers and the so-called weapons of mass destruction.
Yes.
So what do you think? Does he have a point?
Yes, he has a very good point. I disagree with Rand Paul on 99% of issues. But on this one, he is 100% right. And I'll tell you the basis for part of this problem is the fact that in 2011, Barack Obama signed into law a bill that allows the propagandization of the American people. And there's background to it. When I was on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee staff, I was the chief investigator. And I did an investigation into the efficacy of radio and TV Marti. This is a propaganda operation that is run from a governmental body called the Broadcasting Board of Governors. And it's meant to broadcast pro-American propaganda to Cuba. The truth is, nobody listens to Radio Marti and nobody watches TV Marti, except when baseball is being broadcast. They love Spanish language baseball games. So I went down to Key West, Florida to do a study on whether or not Cubans are able to pick up the signal. And we flew to Cuba and we flew up and down the coast of Cuba, and you could see the lights of Havana, and we're listening to the radio. So I came back and I said, you can hear it in Havana, but you can't hear it outside of Havana. The signal's not strong enough. So what they decided to do was to raise the strength of the signal. But by raising the strength of the signal, then you could hear it in Florida. And we had a law that you cannot broadcast propaganda to the American people. Well, if the American people can hear Radio Marti, even by accident, that's a violation of the law. So what did the government do? It changed the law and said, well, it's okay to broadcast propaganda and have the American people hear it. Now, the intent of the law was just for that little piece of the coast of Florida to pick up Spanish language radio and TV Marti. But what it ended up doing is freeing anybody to broadcast propaganda across the United States. Anybody, including the American government. And so this made it even more dangerous. So then what's the response to that response? The response is to set up a disinformation governance board, to have the CIA monitoring our news, to have the FBI investigating people who publish alternative views on current events. It's getting completely out of hand. You used the word Orwellian. I think I did too in the piece. Yeah. And that's exactly what it is. It's Orwellian.
It's I think the comedian Jimmy Dore, he said recently jokingly that they want to protect our freedom and liberty by taking away our freedom and liberty.
Yeah, he's exactly right.
In your article, you also talk about an even worse threat than this new institution. It's like some kind of private organization called Newsguard.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
I think this is an incredibly dangerous development. So there is this new company called Newsguard that was created by some very serious people with serious journalistic backgrounds. One was the creator of a television network here in the United States called Court TV, which broadcasts every single day important court proceedings around the country. And the other was the former editor of the Wall Street Journal. So, their resumes are impeccable. These are serious people. But what they did is they surrounded themselves with people that I would consider to be outright dangerous. And these people, and I'll get to who they are in a moment, these people see their job as going through the internet, finding all the alternative news sites, and if they don't conform with mainstream media, they put this little red tag that says unreliable, so that when you Google, let's say you want to Google Consortium News, where I published the piece, then it might say unreliable with a disclaimer, this is an unreliable source of news. Well, unreliable according to whom? Unreliable because they disagree with you on what's happening in Venezuela or Ukraine or, wherever, Ethiopia. Who determines that this is an unreliable source of news? Well, the people who determine it include Michael Hayden, the former director of the CIA, director of NSA, and principal deputy director of national intelligence, whose job it was to lie, cheat, steal, and obfuscate. Another one is Tom Ridge, the first Secretary of Homeland Security, who was implicated in the kidnapping and illegal rendition of a Canadian professor, Maher Arar. He was kidnapped off of a plane at John F. Kennedy Airport and sent to Syria to be tortured for 10 months. These are the people who are going to decide if what we read is true or not true, it's propaganda or not propaganda. At Consortium News, our editor-in-chief, Joe Loria, very serious journalistic background. He was an editor at the Wall Street Journal. He was an editor at the Boston Globe. He was the chief investigative correspondent at the New York Times. This is a serious guy. Consortium News was founded by Robert Perry, who won multiple Pulitzer Prizes for his work with the Los Angeles Times and was the journalist who broke the story on Iran-Contra. So they decided that they didn't like our editorial take on the war in Ukraine. And the editorial take was that we didn't take a position, right? I happen to support the Ukrainians. Some of my colleagues happen to support the Russians. There are some that are in between, saying that the U.S. meddled and this is really the fault of the U.S. So we didn't take an analytic line on Ukraine. Well, Newsguard demanded that we support Ukraine unreservedly. And they said that if we didn't, they would put an unreliable tag next to us. And it wasn't just us at Consortium News. It was Mint Press News, which mostly reports on Middle Eastern issues. It was The Gray Zone, which is a deeply analytic independent news site founded and run by Max Blumenthal, the son of the famed Sidney Blumenthal of the New York Times. And so, everybody went about their response a different way. At the Gray Zone, they decided that they would wear this red tag as a badge of honor. Mint Press News doesn't have the money to fight something like this. At Consortium News, we hired an attorney, and we refuted their accusations point by point by point. The refutation was 68 pages long. And we said, look, we'll take you to court. Now, why does Newsguard do this kind of thing? They do it for money, because they sell this service to the Pentagon, and they've made millions and millions of dollars. So that Pentagon analysts, when they're looking at all source information, or they call it OSINT, open source intelligence, they won't waste their time by looking for information from a site that has been deemed unreliable. One other funny thing about Newsguard too, the initial communication from them was an email from a young man who claimed to be a journalist, now an analyst for Newsguard. The only journalism he ever did was he spent 2 years at a science news wire service that went bankrupt. And so when you Google him for anything that he wrote in that 2 years, not a single article comes up. So this is who's going to judge if we're serious journalists or not? I'm a winner of the Penn First Amendment Award, one of the big 4 literary awards in America. We have Chris Hedges as one of our regular columnists. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner from the New York Times. And this child is going to tell us that what we're writing is propaganda? We won't stand for it.
One thing I noticed in Europe, a lot of organizations and think tanks that are linked to this kind of stuff, this kind of behavior, are often linked to NATO. And I saw
yes.
the one of the board members is also the former NATO chief, right? Anders Fogh Rasmussen.
I forgot that. Yes, you're exactly right. And I actually put that in the article. There are very, very close ties to NATO and to American defense contractors. You look at the think tanks around Washington. We have more than 1,200 think tanks, if you can imagine this, in the Washington area. There are about a dozen that are serious heavy hitters with multi-million-dollar budgets. And they're all, literally, all of them are on the payroll of the likes of Raytheon and Northrop Grumman and Boeing and McDonnell Douglas. And I'll tell you how I know that. Because my ex-wife was one of the senior officials at Northrop Grumman who was in charge of providing the funding to these think tanks. So yeah, there are close ties to NATO, close ties to the defense industry here in the United States, close ties to the Pentagon, and they want to make sure that everybody falls right into line.
And regarding Michael Hayden, yeah?
Yeah.
Can you say something about, I think just from what I remember, he has a sort of hideous reputation.
Listen, Michael Hayden is one of the dark characters operating in Washington, D.C. This is a very bad man. I actually can't think of anything nice to say about him. He was the head of NSA on 9/11. Mm-hmm. It was Michael Hayden who made the decision to violate both the law and NSA's charter by initiating spying operations on American citizens. It's Michael Hayden who implemented the interception of American citizens' communications without a warrant. He was promoted for his law breaking by being made director of the CIA. And as director of the CIA, he continued the implementation of the torture program, of the rendition program, and of the secret prison program. And he went to Capitol Hill every 6 months and denied that any of it existed. And then he became the principal deputy director of national intelligence under the notorious John Negroponte, another one of the darkest figures of of modern American history. So this is an all-around very bad man. And that's who they put on the board of directors of this company. That's who's going to decide what news you and I are allowed to read.
I just want to read a short passage from your article because about what this Newsguard is doing. They rate alternative media sites all over the world and give them a score from 0 to 100. So it says, these scores are based on the following list of criteria: does not repeatedly publish false content, gather and present information responsibly, regularly corrects or clarifies errors, handles the difference between news and opinions responsibly, avoids deceptive headlines, discloses ownership and financing. So when you just read those things, it sounds pretty good, I guess. Like it's, I mean, but what is the sort of, how do they abuse this?
Great question. So using Consortium News as an example, we have all that information right there on the homepage. Founded by Robert Perry, with a link to Robert Perry's bio. Then we have Joe Loria, editor-in-chief, which is linked to Joe Loria's bio. Then we have the entire list of the members of the board of directors and what all of us do for a living. Every time we write an article, not only does it say, written by John Kiriakou, but at the very bottom it says, written by John Kiriakou, and has my entire bio. So there's no question where I'm coming from. No question what my own personal biases are. And then there's a page that shows fundraising and where Consortium News gets its money, right? We don't take any money from any corporate entities. We don't take any money, not $1, from any governments, domestic or foreign. It's $5, $10, $20 at a time from individual readers. That's it. They didn't care. That wasn't good enough. And they said, well, that information doesn't count for very many points anyway. Sure, you did it. Sure, you put it on the website. But what we're more interested in is your position on Ukraine. So it didn't really matter. They say that these things matter and they assign points to them, but that's not what mattered. And on the very same day that this happened, which just happened to be payday, unfortunately, PayPal froze Consortium News' account and confiscated our funds. Now, we're not a wealthy news organization. We had $9,325 in that account, and they froze it, and they wouldn't give it back. But like I said a few minutes ago, we elected to hire an attorney, and the attorney made a public announcement that we would join a class action lawsuit in the federal district of Northern California against PayPal, saying that they were guilty of theft. It's one thing to say we don't want to do business with Consortium News, but they stole our money on top of it. As soon as we announced we were joining the lawsuit, they released the money. But they said, your account is suspended permanently and we don't ever want to do business with you again. Okay, but why? What was it that we did? So our editor-in-chief, Joe Loria, called PayPal on the phone all day long and finally got through to a human being. It was a young woman, and she said, well, you violated the terms of agreement. And he said, what did we do that violated the terms of agreement? Well, she couldn't really say because we hadn't violated the terms of agreement. And then Joe asked her, did somebody complain? Did somebody file a complaint against us? And she confirmed that there were no complaints against us. And after this conversation went on for several minutes, she finally said, look, we just don't like your position on Ukraine. And so they just decided to steal our money and throw us out. And that's what it's really come down to in the United States. You have to toe the line or you have to fight battles.
One would think that you have this protection in the First Amendment.
Exactly. And that's why these cases are all going to end up in court. That's why somebody's going to sue Newsguard for its stupid red tag. Somebody's going to sue PayPal for its confiscation of funds. somebody's going to sue the Disinformation Governance Board, and it's going to have to go to the Supreme Court because this is getting out of control very quickly.
Why is this development so dangerous, do you think?
Because it's a slippery slope. You know, it all started, in my mind, after 9/11 with passage of the so-called Patriot Act. We voluntarily just gave up our freedoms, right? All in the name of security. And we never got those freedoms back. Well, once we gave up those freedoms, governmental entities, private companies started looking at other things that they could take away from us. And for the last 20 years, we've been struggling, dealing with these issues now of propaganda and freedom of speech and disinformation and transparency. It would be worse if we hadn't had the revelations of Edward Snowden. You know, Snowden at least put the issue into the mainstream for debate. But it's an uphill struggle, truly.
I don't know. I have been following mostly, of course, the situation here in Europe, but the last couple of years has seen a literal explosion of so-called fact checkers, various projects of, institutions fighting disinformation, fighting conspiracy theories, another rubber sort of concept, and, courses at the university, you name it, that it seems like a literal explosion. So you wonder why now this has become so important to fight disinformation.
Well, here in the States, I think this is a result of the 2016 election. You know, the rumors got started that the Russians had essentially stolen the election for Donald Trump. And we know that that's not true, right? We know from the Mueller report. But most Americans either chose to ignore it or believe that the Mueller report was flawed. I'll give you an example. Just today, I posted something on Facebook. I also write for an outlet called Covert Action Magazine. And we're doing a fundraiser at the end of June in New York. So I put it on Facebook. I said, please come to this fundraiser. It's for Covert Action Magazine. And here's a list of speakers. I'm going to speak, and Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers whistleblower, and Ray McGovern, who's also a CIA officer, and it was a whole list of people. Abby Martin from the Empire Files. And everybody was saying, thumbs up, like, love, great lineup, great program. And then one guy wrote, I can't believe you would be associated with these people. They're all friends of mine, by the way. I can't believe you would be associated with these people. They're Russian propagandists. They just refuse to believe that the Russians gave us Donald Trump. Did none of you people read the Mueller report? And I wrote, I read the Mueller report, but it's clear that you didn't. Because look, Julian Assange said that the DNC emails were not hacked remotely, right? Bill Binney, the number 4 person in NSA and a renowned whistleblower, said that the speed by which the DNC emails were downloaded could only have been to a thumb drive. They couldn't have been downloaded remotely. The speed made it impossible. Number 3, Craig Murray, the former British ambassador to Uzbekistan and another renowned whistleblower, said that he was the go-between between WikiLeaks and the DNC whistleblower who took the thumb drive. And then the Mueller report said there was no evidence that the DNC emails were hacked by the Russians. How much more clear could it possibly be? But there are so many people who consider themselves to be progressive, on the political left here, who just want to scream about the Russians. The Russians are behind all of our problems. And what we have to do is to give up our freedoms to make sure that the Russians don't attack us again.
I think this example with Russiagate is also a very good illustration of the hypocrisy, because the establishment and the mainstream media they keep warning us about the dangers of conspiracy theories. But when it comes to Russia theory, which has, Russiagate, which is a conspiracy theory, they've been peddling it for 2 years.
Yes.
Without looking for any serious evidence. So if they were serious about warning for conspiracy theories, they would warn about Russiagate as well.
You're absolutely right. And, I'll add something to that, too. Here in the United States, people make a lot of the fact that companies associated with Russia spent $50,000 on Facebook ads in the period around the 2016 election. Okay, half of that money was spent after the election was over. That leaves $25,000. Of the $25,000, almost all of it was spent in states that were already solidly pro-Trump or solidly pro-Clinton. So we're supposed to believe that the Russians threw the election for $25,000? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. There's no conspiracy here. Now, did the Russians buy the ads? Sure they did. Whatever the ads were. We're told that they weren't even ads in many cases. They were pictures of dogs and cats and flowers and stuff like that. We do the same thing overseas. The CIA does it, right? The Pentagon does it. But was it meant to throw the election? You can't throw an American election. We have 320 million people here, and you're going to spend $25,000 on ads, and that's supposed to throw the election? It's outrageous.
Yeah, I recently did an interview with another American, Lance DeHaven Smith. He has written a book about the history of the word conspiracy theorist. And he said that the CIA actually weaponized this term in the 60s.
That's absolutely right.
Because they couldn't really handle the debate after the Kennedy murder.
Yes.
So they sent out this memo to a lot of journalists and a lot of newspapers that saying basically that don't go into arguments, about bullets coming from the wrong direction and so on. Just label it as a conspiracy theory to not to have this discussion at all.
Yes.
And since that, it has become a very toxic term, really, hasn't it? Mm-hmm.
It's become an insult. Yeah. To call someone a conspiracy theorist or a conspiracy theory adherent, it's a great insult. It's a dismissal of their intellect, really is what it is. It's telling them that they're a person not to be taken seriously.
But the dangerous thing is that, if I'm an investigative reporter, I'm investigating conspiracies. That's what I'm doing.
Sure. What would Woodward and Bernstein have said? Yeah. Or what would people have said to Woodward and Bernstein when they first came to the conclusion that the president of the United States ordered a burglary to steal information on his Democratic opponent? What bigger conspiracy could there be?
Yeah.
And it was true.
So these are the two main terms they use: disinformation and conspiracy theory, right?
Yes, correct. And it's very damaging.
Yeah, I think it was this quote from Baudelaire: the best trick was to make people believe it doesn't exist.
That's true. Yeah.
You cannot even talk about it because then you're spreading disinformation or conspiracy theories.
Yes.
So before we wrap up, where do we go from here?
Well, this is going to be a very long-term fight. And I think those of us who appreciate alternative views, or at least appreciate the ability to have access to alternative views, have to keep fighting. We have to stand up to our governments. We have to stand up to private industry, these private companies like Newsguard. I'm going to continue to write for the likes of Consortium News and Reader-Supported News and Covert Action Magazine and the Sheer Post. And I will continue to call it as I see it. And I hope everybody else who writes for these outlets and people who read these outlets will continue to fight as well.
And I kind of think that it can't be a complete coincidence that you have this board of fighting disinformation being created by Biden right now in the United States, and exactly a similar institution is being created in Sweden, and I'm sure in many other countries as well.
No, I can't imagine that's a coincidence. there has to be coordination between governments on these issues.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being with us. It's been an honor.
Thank you very, very much for having me. It was a pleasure.